created this Zoom how-to video with the Stamp Club community in mind. Online meetings are a great way to connect with fellow members and philatelists. They're convenient and offer great opportunities for recruiting new members to your club. You can use Zoom to gather casually or formally, and you can use it for share and tell, online presentations. You can even use it to stream a video. It's a neat technology, and we want to share how to produce and host a fun online meeting with your club. I'd like to introduce Ms. Joan Harmer, Mr. Mark Bailey, and Mr. Scott English, and I'm Heidi Rhodes. Let's get started.
Heidi, I'm Joan Harmer. Again, I'm the Vice President and Chief Technology Officer for the Collectors Club, and I am going to tell you all about how to send out a Zoom invitation. So with Zoom invitations, like a wedding, there's many different choices and many different styles for you to choose from. So how do you decide? What I do is I look at consider your group, your audience, your meeting, and your goals. So I'm going to move through some of these really quickly, and we are going to talk about a simple Zoom meeting invitation, a Zoom meeting registration, a calendar integration, and the custom invites. And we're going to go through this really quickly. For more details, you could look in the Zoom instructions. So let's start with a standard formal invitation. This is what most people see. So basically, all you do, it's very easy. If you have a personal meeting room selected, it will automatically give you a standard link. You just copy and paste that into your email or in a chat. Your audience will click on that and join the meeting. Obviously, this is really good for impromptu meetings and for small group meetings. It's probably not something you want to send out to a very large audience. So they're easy to set up, easy to send, very quick, and it's the same URL, so people don't have to worry about changing the invitation. The cons are, it is the same URL. So if you don't want someone butting in on your meeting, you're going to have to change that URL. So, and it also, if you have multiple people using your account, someone could start a meeting and it will be in conflict with one you're running. If you don't have enough licenses, one of you is going to lose. So now let's go again for informal invitations. The other way is if you don't have your meeting room set up, you just set up a meeting. Very easy. You hit schedule meeting. And in this instance, I don't have any meetings scheduled. This option comes up. You type in your topic, a little description if you like, the date, the time, the duration. And for a very simple meeting, don't require this registration. You just go on, it will automatically send you a link. And if you look at the little button on the right, you could just copy that and paste that into your email. And voila, you have a very simple Zoom invitation. This is what most people see. Your user will just simply click on the link to join the Zoom meeting. If they have a telephone, nice thing is they could just dial in also. Very easy, very simple. And it will get you started. Shows up in your meeting list. When you're ready to start, simply click Start Meeting and your meeting's away. So to give you an example, this is what happens, starting your meeting. Okay, the pros, sorry, let me refresh that. The next thing I want to talk about is using invitations and clicking that registration form. So what that registration form will do will require people to fill out information that you select. Typically their name, their email, and I don't think sometimes if you're a member of the club. So what this allows you to do is track your registrants. You could add your own branding. You could add the meeting to your calendar because the invites come up with an add to calendar. And it could be configured to allow to allow people to confirm your identity before you actually send them the meeting details. You could also combine it with any other meeting settings, like require authentication, and to make it a really secure meeting. So what you would need to do is verify that identity or only allow a user to join through the email that they registered for. So the cons for doing it this way is that there's a bunch of steps for your attendees. They have to register. They can't just click on the link. They have to register before they do it. They could also forward this invite in email, so they could actually send it to people who you didn't want in the meeting. It's not quite as quick to set up as an in-room meeting, but it doesn't take that long. And it's a little bit more work to do the branding. So to give you an idea, you just schedule the meeting, hit the required button. I usually have auto approved so that everyone who registers is automatically approved, but it gives you a link. And again, you could copy the invitation. This invitation just looks like you could register in advance for the meeting. So again, I set it up to automatically approve. If you want it a little bit more secure, you just say no, and then you will have to physically approve or manually approve everyone who tries to register. There's some other settings like allow users to join from multiple devices. If you want it a little bit more secure, uncheck that, and then they could only join from one device, so they can't really share the invitation. Okay, so this is where you just go to the branding and upload your brand information, put in your logo, and then you could send out the email. So the text of the email looks like this, so you could go ahead and register. When someone clicks on that registration, you get this wonderful page. They type in the information requested. Here I just put the first name, last name, and the email address. Email address is the only one required. And then what happens is this page comes up, and this will also be sent in the email, and you could add it to your calendar. I like invitations that could be added to your calendar because I'm really busy, and if I don't add it to my calendar, sometimes I don't get there. So this is what happens. You get a little email registration confirmation, and this is what you get. A little click to join. You get the calendar links, which I like, and you have the phone number information. Pretty simple. A couple steps, and then you just add it to your calendar when you click the add to calendar, and then it appears. And that's it. And then it appears in your list of registered. So when I registered, you could click in the meeting and see actually who registered for the meeting. That's very useful if you don't know how many people are going to attend the meeting and you only have a license for 100 people. You might want to just use that registration feature to make sure you're not getting up there. So again, it could be combined for controlled access meetings. You could combine it with other meetings, such as require authentication, track registrants, etc. It's a little bit more difficult, requires someone to be authenticated, and you don't allow a dial-in. That's those are all the settings you would do in that registration setting to make a very secure meeting. Okay, so we're going to just go on using manual registration. So what you do there is if you have a webinar, you could upload the registrants here. You could go ahead and if you want people to receive that invitation with the calendar invite, you would just have to go and register them here yourself. So here I registered Keith. I'd go ahead and register Heidi, register Scott, register Mark, and then all they would do is they would get that same invitation. It's a lot more work for the host, but if you want people to add it to the calendar, that's great. I find it a great tool for small meetings. And then again, people will appear. And the cool thing is it gets added to your calendar. which is what I like. So calendar invitations is another neat feature for Zoom. What that does is you use there's another feature right here on the bottom of your Zoom console, which allows you to add the extension. What that does is integrate your calendar, your actual calendar, to your Zoom account. So you could create meetings right from the Zoom account. You can't create the meetings that require registration, but you can create just the normal meetings. In Zoom, in Google, it appears like this. You just click Add Zoom Meeting, but you'll need to do some configuration to remove the Google settings in Google. This is not the same in Outlook, and in Yahoo, that doesn't occur, but Google wants you to use Google Meet. Nice thing about that is it sends out a calendar invite. And for me, these automatically get added to my calendar. So I won't forget this meeting if you send it out via a calendar invite. I would not advise sending calendar invites to like 200 people who may want to register, because I'd get really annoyed if someone added a calendar invite to my calendar that I really didn't want to attend. So when you go and create it, the options are a little bit limited. You could use, the settings are limited, but it does the job and it appears on your calendar. And when you're done with that setting, you just hit send and it appears as an invitation right to the calendar. Okay, and now the last thing, see, it just appeared. The last thing I'm going to do is do custom op invitations. So what that does, and I'm going to be very quick with this, you take all those links that are generated and you just add them into a third-party application, such as Constant Contact or something like that. You just create the link, add the link there, and then use that as your invitation. So basically, you have a lot of options. There's also options to use a payment gateway. The gateways would allow you to collect revenue or donations. We use Eventbrite, and what would happen there is you use Eventbrite to set up the meeting. You collect the donation in Eventbrite. They'll forward you the money. And we use Zapier to automatically send the Eventbrite registrants right into the Zoom registration. So it converts them and sends everything. Well, that is all I'm going to talk about right now for invitations.
I'm the IT chairman at the Royal Philatelic Society London. I'm just going to talk to you about starting meetings and hosting them and so on. Okay, the elements of that. Pretty obviously, to join a meeting, you click on the Join Meeting button and put in the details. Of course, if you want to, if you're hosting the meeting, of course you have to start it. But either way, you then have some controls. If you're the host, you then have some host controls, and some of them you can set through your own settings, which are available from the cogwheel settings option. If we have a look at those, as you see, some of the things you can do there are to do with the audio system, but you can also make controls to do with screen sharing. And there are a number of controls you can use. The most important ones from a host perspective relate to who can do the sharing. And I will show you those in a moment when we look at those through the Zoom window itself. But on here, you can see that we can control about whether shared content is scaled. You can determine whether people can see your Zoom window whilst you're screen sharing. Side-by-side mode is particularly useful. That is to allow, as it says, to participants to see shared screen content alongside a view of either the speaker or indeed all the other participants. So these things are quite useful in terms of laying the screen out properly whilst you're sharing the screen. Pretty obviously, if you are sharing your computer desktop, then you obviously don't want system notifications to keep popping up. so you can turn those off. Typically, you want to share individual windows at any one time, but sometimes you may wish to show all windows from an application. So let's say you've got those options. And you can also determine what options are available for screen sharing. I normally select all sharing options so that you can choose the specifics of what it is you want to show. If you use a Zoom room, then again, there are some options around using a Zoom room. We're not using a Zoom room today, so I won't dwell on those so much. But if we look at the controls that are available when in a meeting, and I will now go to that and bring that up so we've got it. Then within the meeting, we've got, because I'm screen sharing at the moment, then we get the information that I'm screen sharing. But if we look at the options on that, there should be a few more options. Yeah. For example, you can make sure that the sound that is also going with whatever content you're sharing is also shared. You can imagine a situation where you're playing a video and you want people not only to see it, but also hear it. So you would share the sound for that. The other options relate much more to, in terms of being the host, in terms of what you can do as a host, in terms of controlling the behavior of the participants and indeed connecting with those participants. And I think the best way for us to see that is if Heidi, who's currently the host, if Heidi passes me host control, I will then be able to demonstrate them much easier than I can when I'm not a host.
Done.
Thank you, Heidi. So now when I go into manage participants, we can see that I'm the host, and I've therefore got all the facilities that a host has. And if we look at some of those individual ones, for example, if we look at what we can do with regard to one of our participants, Scott, then as a host, you can choose if you want to switch off a participant's camera. I could click on stop video and we would stop seeing Scott looking at us through his camera. Another option that is very useful, particularly when people are speaking, is you can choose to highlight someone and make them spotlight for everyone. I'm going to do that with Scott right now. And what will happen, you'll see that how the display changes like that. So you see how now Scott is being highlighted for all of us. We can all see Scott very large on the screen and everybody else is shown in the small window. I will obviously turn that off again, remove spotlight. I will then go back to gallery view on my screen. The other sorts of controls, I mentioned earlier on that Heidi was host. She had the rights, therefore, to make somebody else a host, which is what she did. You can also, and this is quite important, and this is a conversation that Scott and I were having earlier today. It's very important sometimes when you're hosting a meeting to actually have somebody else also working alongside you as the co-host. And I'm going to make Heidi co-host to show the point. So a little pop-up comes up, says, do I want to do this? I say yes. And now both Heidi and I are hosts. She's the co-host and I'm the host. You can see that in the list. Of course, if you need to, you can take that permission away again. There's a remove co-host permission now. Quite a useful control. Sometimes people have trouble getting their names right, believe it or not. People don't always get their names right when they come into Zoom. And if you're concerned that someone's got the wrong name on the screen, you can select their name and you can rename them. To demonstrate that with Scott, I'm going to simply rename him to be Mr. S. English, for example. And we can see now that his name on the screen has changed to be Mr. S. English. You can do that from the participants list, which is what I clicked on, or of course you can do it on an individual basis from the little drop-down menu there as well. I'll put you back as you were, Scott, just to show the point that straightforward enough to do. That's quite an important thing, because as I say, sometimes people come in and by mistake they've forgotten to rename themselves. They've got silly names like iPad 6 or something. And it's a bit confusing if you've got lots of people all called iPad 5 or iPad 6. You think, who's who? So it is useful as a host sometimes. One of the things that can happen, of course, is that people have got their microphones on and you get a lot of background noise, or they start chatting to somebody. That can happen in a meeting as well. And at the moment, all of the other people apart from me are muted. But thank you, Joan. Joan's unmuted herself. And
So I'm just going to start talking at you because I think I'm
talking because she wants to. And straight away, I can put her name and click on mute, and hey, she's muted. That's the point. That's the power that the host has. They can take control if they're concerned that there perhaps is some extraneous noise or too much noise coming from one of the participants. They can selectively mute those participants. There is also a really handy option towards the bottom of the participants list, which says mute all. And guess what? That mutes everybody except for the host at a single click. And that can be useful if you've got a large meeting and you've got a lot of people in it, and you just want to mute everybody all at once. You just reach for mute all, and it does exactly what it says on the tin. Well, we've talked about many of the controls. There's the chat facility. That is very useful. And again, there are controls you can set for that in terms of who can chat. But the most useful point about it is that it allows you to chat to everyone that's in the on the call, or indeed you can pick individuals and send them an individual message, and it will go directly to that individual. And in that way, you can actually use it as a kind of silent way of managing the whole call. You know, you can keep in contact with people. Maybe you instruct them, maybe you give them a tip about you might need to unmute your mic or something. You know, I mean, you could do that silently without having to call it out. So it's a really useful facility. That's the chat. One of the things that you can do with meetings, obviously, is you can record them. We're recording this one at the moment, obviously, and therefore the host has controls around pausing and stopping recording. And of course, if you've paused it, then you can restart the recording and so on. So the controls around that all of these controls are in a control bar along the bottom of the Zoom screen. And that control bar, you can make it appear by putting your mouse over the Zoom window or by using the Alt key on your keyboard. Either of those makes that control bar appear, and of course pressing the Alt key again makes it disappear. So that's about managing the screen. Pretty obviously, when you are sharing, you can control, and indeed if you're the host, you can control who can share. So let's look at that a minute. I'm going to click on the options on the share screen here. And next to it, there are options around who can, there's a little upward pointing arrow, and it says who can share, only the host or all participants, and who can start sharing when someone else is sharing. So you see, this allows you to control the sharing of content through the screens. Some of the other options are available. Not everybody uses them, but they are there. There's the thing about annotating. If someone's sharing content and you want to be able to annotate on it, i.e. draw lines on it, that can be useful if you're trying to convey, you know, a particular point. But of course, that can also be annoying. So the point, as Joan made earlier about what type of audience have you got, this is what she was saying when she was talking about setting up meetings. You know, some of these controls are really useful for certain types of meetings. Others are less useful, and so you can turn them off through the various options that you have available to you. So you can see there's enable annotation for others or hide names of annotations and so on. So there's various controls around that as well. One of the really useful features when you're starting a meeting or at any point during the meeting is that if you want to, you can turn on a waiting room. And the waiting room is a very powerful control mechanism. What the waiting room is about is as people join the meeting, do they come straight in or do they get held in a waiting area and are then to be admitted into the meeting by the host? And the way you can turn that on and off, again, if you've got the participants panel open, there's a thing with 3 dots and you click on there. And this particular one, oh, sorry, I'm on the wrong one. On the participants one, that's what I meant to say. At the bottom of the participants panel, there are 3 dots. And when you click on that, then you bring up a mini menu. And one of those is enable waiting room. And by enabling the waiting room, if anybody then joins your meeting, they go into that waiting room. The participants list, when they arrive, it tells you at the top that there's somebody in the waiting room, and you can then click on that person and choose to admit them into your meeting. So as I say, through that mechanism, you can control that. There are also options around muting participants upon entry. That's very useful indeed. Perhaps you don't want people straight away to have their microphones enabled so that you can hear extraneous noise. So that's a really powerful one for hosts to use. You can see also there's controls around allowing participants to unmute themselves, also to rename themselves. We looked at renaming earlier. And if you want to, you can have the system play a sound when someone joins or leaves. Some people find that very annoying because it means it's beeping every time somebody joins. So you might not want to use that one, but it's there if you do. Lock meeting, I will also mention because that's a very powerful control from a host point of view. The idea with lock meeting is nobody else comes in, even if they're late. Sorry, even though they've had the invitation, sorry, you've locked it, they can't come in. So that is a powerful one. If you say to yourself, look, we've got all the people we want in here, we don't want any more interruptions, so you can then lock the meeting. So those I think you agree there's a lot of controls there that allow you to determine what happens in your meetings. The only other one I was going to mention that again is probably worth mentioning because some people, when they realize they're being recorded or they're they're hosting a thing, but they don't necessarily want to show off where they are, is the virtual background. You can see at the moment I've got a virtual background behind me, this gray and white pattern. That is along with the stop video, so because it's part of the video controls. If I click on that, if I choose my virtual background, I've got a selection of them here. But if I turn it off, then of course, it shows the fact that at the moment I'm sitting in a darkened room because I am, the lights are off at the moment. But there is also, in the latest version of Zoom, version 5.5, I think it is, there is a blur facility, and that gives a blurred background. Okay, that doesn't really show up at the moment because I haven't got the lights on. But that's also a very powerful mechanism. And you can see there that it shows the virtual background is with a blur. Other virtual backgrounds are available, including nice pictures of famous landmarks such as the Golden Gate Bridge and so on. So some people like to use those because they obscure what's behind them. So again, it's a security feature in that respect. And I think I would like to hand back to Heidi at this point. And I hope that was useful. So let's carry on with the learning.
As many people know, I am a member of well over 60 chapters around the United States and in Canada. And so I have been a frequent attendee to the locally sponsored Zoom meetings. I am not I'm not the Zoom manager, but based on what I'm about to say, this is based on a myriad of experiences. And so let me start with this. I think the hardest thing for people to accept is that they don't have mastery of something the minute they start doing it. And so what I often tell people is, and Mark and Joan have done a phenomenal job of laying out the great and robust tools that are there with Zoom, with getting people excited about an event in advance, those sorts of things. But I want you to understand that both of them have had their moments of small disaster, and so I want everyone who's listening to this to understand things are going to go wrong. What we're trying to do is help you move a little further ahead in the learning process than where we were when we started out with this. So you've got to remember, it's not as simple as just turning on Zoom at the appointed time and then letting people in. You know, one of the things that you want to do is take as much care as you would if you were meeting in person, working with the person or people who are going to do a presentation. Make sure that they have their material ready to go. Either get material, if you're doing a show and tell, I think clubs have succeeded best at gathering those show and tell items in one place and letting one person be the share screen individual. If you're looking to have a smaller, more intimate, free-flowing conversation, you're going to you're going to use that lock room like Mark suggested, and then everyone can share their screen, and you will be able to sort of exchange discussion points and talk about it. But what's really important is just sort of having a very simple outline of your plan, starting with, what do I need to do before the meeting? Well, you need to prepare your speaker if you're having a guest speaker who's going to do a presentation. Maybe do a practice run with them to make sure that they are able to handle the tools they need in order to do their presentation, or if you should take over the share screen responsibility for them and let them simply do the presentation and talking, and then let you know when they need to advance. Both are workable and both are very enjoyable for the audience. But what can be really difficult is if you have someone who says, don't worry, I'm an expert in Zoom, and then you get into a meeting and then you have sort of that awkward 5 to 10 minute period that they're not having luck getting their screen up, and there's no one really on the call who can help them with that. If someone's doing a presentation, I really encourage you to get them to do two things. Number one is, if they're able to directly connect to the internet rather than using Wi-Fi, it makes a lot of sense to have them set up for that in advance of the meeting. The second thing you want to make sure that they do is that they have a distraction-free environment around them, because if you're going to mute everyone else in the meeting, but then there's dogs barking and a lot of racket and phones ringing in the background, then they're not ready to go, and that can be very difficult for you. So those are two very simple things that you can do to help make the event enjoyable. While the meeting is going on, I really do think it's important that either you have someone who is managing the room. So if they're not, but they can't be doing the presentation, they can't be hosting the meeting at the same time, someone's got to be managing the room. Find those open mics that might be creating distractions, or that camera screen that's creating distractions. So make sure that's really part of your plan going into it. From there, you're going to find that those are 90% of the problems. It's the human issues that we deal with that can be distracting from enjoying the event. Your presenter's gone through a lot of work, and they're very proud of the research they've done and the images they're going to show and the conversation they're going to have. So make sure they can do that. Also make sure they're ready to take Q&A at the end, and that everyone does have a chance to engage the presenter at the end, because that makes it a lot more fun. I want to have a little bit more of an open conversation, so I'm going to invite Joan and Mark to jump in with me if they've got insights they can use, and I bet they've got horror stories to go with them. So by all means, please, Joan, Mark, share with us.
We almost had one. Mark pointed out, you notice I moved my camera. My husband's making lunch. We don't need to show it to all of you.
That's where that technical run through and that sort of practice session that Scott mentioned is really important, because then that allows the people involved to have a look at it, see how long it's going to last. If it seems it's going to be too long, so that as you say, that would then do away with the ability to have a Q&A session, then you perhaps need to encourage your presenter to maybe cut down a bit on what they're going to say, to give space for that. And another very powerful facility, which is available in Zoom, is the ability for questions to be raised as textual questions as opposed to waiting to have to actually say them. The chat facility allows that. People can choose to put questions into that, which either they can direct to everyone, so everyone that's on the call can see the questions, or indeed they can choose to direct those questions to a particular individual. And it's quite a good idea if you're going to have, as you say, a lot of participants and you've got quite a long presentation, to actually have somebody at the end of that presentation who's responsible for kind of coordinating those questions, rather than the presenter being hit suddenly with you know what I mean. By doing it that way, you manage the Q&A in a fairly controlled way, so it doesn't get out of hand, and indeed it doesn't drag on so long as well.
Mark, you just made a really good point, and I want to punctuate that. You talked about using the chat function for asking questions. Sometimes the local clubs and chapters are recording these presentations, and one of the things that I've seen happen more often than not, and the speaker is always going to be very generous with their time, but what happens is someone has an in-the-moment question or statement and they jump in. So Mark, you saying that really is a great point, because what the chat function allows is for those people who have that in-the-moment question to be able to type that out and make sure that you can get to that question at the end of the presentation, but it doesn't interrupt the flow of the speaker who's going forward.
Absolutely.
So thank you for raising that point.
Yes.
And I think having someone else read the questions is very good, because in the chat you get a lot, it's free flow. So you have a lot of, oh, that was a great meeting. It's not a question. So when, as a presenter, it would be very hard for you to answer the question and look in the chat for your next question. So
Yes.
that separate person is just ideal.
Yeah. And the other thing that happens, of course, is that multiple people ask very similar questions.
Yes.
Yeah. They might all word them slightly differently, but the gist or the essence of their question is the same. And so by having someone looking at the questions and going, oh, right, well, there's that question from this person, there's that question from this, hey, they're all the same question. I'm going to paraphrase one of those questions. I'm going to ask it once and make the point that it's being asked by Scott and Joan and Heidi, and let the presenter then answer it once, addressing all three questions in one hit.
I want to touch on another aspect of these meetings that I think is incredibly important. The Zoom bomber is a known enemy to many Zoom events. The well-meaning identical twin is the Zoom hijacker. And by that I mean, if you have a presenter who has a knowledge of an area, and sometimes you have a very well-meaning person who shares the passion of that topic, so much so that they become the center of attention, and they have a lot of questions and a lot of comments, and boy, they'd really like to share their screen because they've got 4 examples to add to the point that they're making. And it's very difficult, and I know that we don't want to be rude to people, but remember, one person dominating a conversation excludes everyone else in the conversation. And so you always want to be very careful about making sure that if you have a speaker on a topic that someone has a passion about, that they can ask their questions or interject a statement, but the host really can keep the flow of the conversation going so that others don't feel excluded or have to sort of be a witness to a long-form conversation about what an individual spectator knows versus the person who was kind enough to do a presentation and be there.
Yeah, and that again comes, particularly if you make use of the chat, that really facilitates managing that in the way that you've just said, because they may be putting several sentences, perhaps even whole paragraphs of information in the chat box about what they know about the subject. And if you've got one person who's kind of managing it, they can look at it and they can go, yeah, there's some really good points being made here, and you can pick out 2 or 3 and share those with everybody, but you don't have to read out verbatim the great long spiel that is in the chat box. So yeah, it is a very powerful mechanism.
But there is also a configuration on the chat where you could either chat to the whole audience or just have your attendees chat to the panelist. Now, some people watching get really distracted with all these comments popping up, the chat messages. So when you just send the messages to the panelists, to the host, I think that's, that works out for us.
Yes, you're right, Joan. It is a good way of controlling it. Yeah.
We always keep a text message here. So if the host, when I need to communicate with another co-host, and it's something that I might not want recorded in a chat, I would always text it.
Well, that's a separate issue, isn't it? Yeah, if you don't want things to be recorded, then you make it really private. Then, yeah. Sure.
So I don't know how it is on most stamp in the meetings, but how are you guys managing? Are you allowing participants, your attendees, to ask the question, or do you have them raise the little hand function? Do you read the questions out loud?
Well, at the Royal, what we do on our Royal meetings is we have one person who coordinates all the questions. We do not encourage our members to ask questions verbally. We do ask them to put them in the chat, and only by exception, if perhaps it's what it says in the chat is, I really would like to ask this question directly, or the nature of the question is quite complex and actually perhaps needs a bit more explanation than is forthcoming in the chat. Then, if I was doing it, I might then invite that person to unmute themselves and ask the question directly. But typically, we manage it through that we restrict the questions to only be delivered through the chat.
We're in America in the Collectors Club, so we do everything. So we have that structured comment the question and answer that you have at the Royal, where one person controls the Q&A. And then what we do is we conclude the formal section, and we have the webinar format, but then we let everyone come in and ask questions and turn on the video, and it's a bit of a free-for-all. And that part we try not to record. So, because again, it's unstructured, unpredictable, and
Yes.
And that's where we need multiple hosts there to control that. And I find people like to be able to talk to each other. Mm-hmm. From a content and educational perspective, we're all, with this COVID and not being able to meet personally, everyone just really wants to talk and say, hi, Mark, how are you? I haven't seen you in a while. And you can't do that necessarily in a chat.
No. And actually, the way that we deal with that, Scott, at the Royal is that, like Joan said, we get to a point where we say, okay, we're going to stop recording now. Now let's have an informal exchange.
Both of you raised the point that I wanted to sort of highlight, and that is, it's the idea of creating a predictable, structured format. I think that's made your presentation so successful, though, and that's one of the things that I want to highlight. People, if people know, everyone who attends the Collectors Club event knows that at the end there is a very informal piece of that business that goes on, as with the Royal, and you are going to have that chance to have that interaction. They'll be more patient when the speaker is doing their presentation, as well as when you get to the Q&A section. So, setting that expectation up in advance and saying, yeah, I do want to have this structured format. We want to, because a lot of clubs are recording these right now for members who cannot attend, and they're sharing them. We're also using some of these that the clubs are recording. We're using those and putting those on YouTube for them. So we want to make sure that can be done, that the value of that knowledge is there, as well as the Q&A section, so that the individuals who did attend the event can gain their saying. And then you end it with the social side, right? That's really smart pre-planning for a club to say, we're going to segment this down and make sure that everyone gets a chance to do a piece of the business that they're going to need to do. And that way, when the meeting is over, you can have some fun and we can all let our hair down.
Indeed.
If we have it.
Exactly. And we also, but we don't only save it to the end, we also do that before the formal part. You just leave the recording going. What we actually do with that recording is we cut off the first, whatever it might be, half an hour, and that ends up on the cutting room floor. And so the actual, as you say, the actual presentation and the Q&A, all those important parts, those are recorded and preserved. But the informal chat at the beginning, and of course, as you say, the sort of informal social chat at the end, those don't end up on the recording.
It's going to be great in years to come to go back and listen to some of these recordings, especially the ones that some of the smaller clubs make that get pretty much into detail and people that we normally don't hear from. So I think it's going to be a great resource for clubs to use these the Zoom meetings and do the recordings.
Absolutely, and that's one of our mantras. And I can bet that both the Royal and the Collectors Club have the same mindset, and that is you have two audiences that you have to remember. The one is the audience that's with you in real time, and we certainly want to make sure that they enjoy the event, that they get the most out of it they can. But the other one to remember is the audience that's not there but will be there later, and they want to be able to get the detail down. They're not in the moment, so they can't enjoy all of that sort of thing. So that's why the structured format, at least in my view, is incredibly important.
I want to thank Mr. Mark Bailey from the Royal Philatelic Society of London and Ms. Joan Harmer. She's from the Collectors Club of New York, of course, the Executive Director of APS, Scott English, for joining us, and everyone for sharing your collective experience with using Zoom. And I think we can all agree it's really a lot of fun and an effort worth trying.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Heidi.
Excellent presentation from all of you. Thank you so much.